I'm Alex Barth. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, on the second day of Patriots Training Camp. And here to break down day 2 with us, and really the first 2 days, we are joined by Evan Lazar, my co-host from the Catch 22 podcast on Patriots.com. He covers the Patriots for Patriots.com. This is about, what would you say, like 2 hours? Less than 2 hours, actually, after we wrapped up recording Catch 22 earlier today. So this will be a little bit of a continuation, a little bit of a more casual show for people who have listened to the two of us before. But Evan, here we go. Training camp. It's no more day one. We're not overreacting to one practice. The ball is rolling down in Foxborough.
Absolutely. And yeah, this is Patriots Catch 22 After Dark. Can we call it that, or 2.0? But
we already have the Sports Hub Underground podcast with Matt Dolphin and Ty Anderson, so the theme kind of fits. But
that's true. I don't want to take away from the Underground pod, but yeah, it's good to be here and talk to you with the roles reversed now, because you're the host and I'm the guest, so that's cool. And it's great. It's great to be back.
The good old days.
It's just like the good old days. Yeah, I like it better this way. It's good to be back out there. Obviously, you and I, we get geeked up for things like this. We get really excited for it. I will say it's a little bit of a tease. We're not in pads yet, so it's a little bit more like mini camp and OTAs, but we'll talk about it. There's some things that I definitely think are brewing in a positive direction for the Patriots. I know there's a lot of negativity out there about the team currently for some people, but there is some positives and obviously some things that we'll talk about that are concerns also. So it's been a fun couple days.
I would even say within, you mentioned it being a tease and there's not much we can glean from these unpadded practices, but it's funny, even within that, like I walked away yesterday. I think I said this, it was not in a bad way. It was the least eventful training camp practice I ever covered, in that they went out on the field, they went about their business, and then they went home. Like, there was no highlight plays. There was no injuries. There was no fights. There was no, breakout. Oh, this guy had an amazing day. He was all over the field. There was nobody who was terrible. It was just kind of a day. And a couple more highlight plays today. There was an injury we'll get into, but it sort of felt, again, relatively uneventful. Now, we're coming off of last year where every training camp was just this pull your hair out experience. But
this whole circus, yeah.
I almost feel like uneventful is good in this context, and they do need to move beyond that at some point. But I go back to last year, and day one last year, the offense wasn't great. And I remember I was on Zolak and Bertrand, and they were like, are you worried? And I said, well, in any camp, you want a healthy back and forth between the offense and the defense. And, the defense is going to have days. The offense is going to have days about how the other side punches back that next day. Do they come back and they respond and show that competitive fire? And we never got there with the offense last year. It was defense throughout camp. I thought a definitive win for the defense on day one. I don't know that it was a definitive win for the offense today. I think it was a really healthy back and forth, but there was that bounce back I thought you saw on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that the glass half full analysis of this for me is that you are seeing the pieces of a Patriots offense that can be successful. I don't think that they've put the whole puzzle together quite yet, but there are these isolated flashes in terms of the results of plays, but there's also schematic things that I'm seeing that I'm optimistic about or excited about, that they're building up to bigger things, and hopefully down the line, it becomes a whole pie. I think right now we're seeing it in isolated instances, and a couple of those things that we talked about a lot last year, Alex, they're doing a little bit more of this year. Under center play action. I think we've seen throughout Mac Jones's career, really throughout the last 25 years in New England, that play action has been a really effective tool for the offense. We're seeing Mac and empty and spread formations out of the gun, some RPO actions, some things that really highlight his strengths as a quarterback. And I think that you just have to continue to stack those days together and build that chemistry and continuity with the schemes that they're running. And it's going to start to come together a little bit more. So I'm not quite as doom and gloom about, he threw another interception today to Kyle Duggar and it hasn't been perfect and there's been ups and downs, because this time of year is more a feeling out process of, okay, what are we good at? What are the things we can hang our hat on? And what are the things that we can sort of build off of from point A to point B? And right now we're still at point A. So just like last year, until we get to point B, we can't freak out just yet. But unlike last year, last year was just a dysfunctional mess. People didn't know where they were lining up. The offense had no purpose. The offense had no rhythm. They had no really understanding of what they were trying to accomplish on a given play, or what their routes were or their assignments were from a blocking perspective. And this is not that at all. This is just, they got to get the execution part of it down. So that's what training camp is for. And that's the glass half full. To the glass half empty, just to go the other direction. What players on offense are making highlight plays for this team right now? Like, what players on offense are giving us those training camp moments where you say, oh, wow, what a catch, or, oh, wow, what a play by, Tyreek Hill, or what a play by Stephon Diggs. I think that if you want to be a pessimist about it, that's where it comes in, is like, who on offense is making that highlight reel catch in a training camp practice. And maybe that's being a little bit too negative or critical, but I think that that's an element of it too. They got to have guys that go out and make highlight reel plays for us to talk about highlight reel catches. And I don't know if they necessarily have shown that quite yet.
I mean, I thought Devontae Parker had a nice high point catch today, but the bigger picture point I would agree with. But you mentioned we're kind of starting to see what the offense is going to look like. You talk about the play action stuff through 2 days, again, very early. And I at the beginning of camp, I said, play along, mark how many times I say it's still early or we're not in pads, and people are through 4 or 5 sheets of paper already. It's still early. What are you seeing as kind of the foundational concepts of this offense, and what's new, what's O'Brien bringing back from 11, what's O'Brien bringing from Alabama, what is maybe some stuff that's carried over from last year, some old stuff from Josh McDaniels?
Yeah, so I think the old McDaniels stuff, they're not going to have a fullback. So they're not going to be formationally the same as they were under McDaniels. But the under center play action stuff, I think, is still going to exist in this offense. But for Bill O'Brien, there's 2 vintage O'Brien things that I think we're seeing. One is the RPOs from Alabama, which I think we're at intro level still with that, but I know PhD level is coming because we know that he's capable of coaching that and he's got it in his playbook. So eventually we're going to get, I hope, and I think, to downfield routes off of RPOs. We've talked about this a ton, like slants and seam routes and things like that off of the run action can be really effective ways to hit plays down the field. But we're seeing the bubble screens, we're seeing the little attachments and things like that to the run actions that I think are precursors to building up towards the more complex RPO style offense. So I think we're going to see some of that. We're going to see Bill O'Brien's empty package. We know that. Mac, and this is one thing that I really think that Mac can excel with, is 5 wide empty and just putting him in the shotgun with those 5 guys around him. And whether it's formationally, whether it's with coverage tells, his ability to process the defense pre and post snap quickly and just distribute the ball from that point of view, I think is going to be an effective way to move the football for this team. So if I'm the Patriots, and I said this on Catch 22, that's how I build the offense. I build the offense with touch deep throws, like those deep crossing patterns or the fades that we've seen them run, where Matt can drop it in the bucket, and it's get the football out of the quarterback's hands, whether that's at an empty, whether that's at an RPO, or whatever the case may be. I think those 2 things are what he does best. The quick processing, the underneath throws that we've seen in the past in the New England offense, and then pushing it down the field, but with air under the ball. You don't want him to have to drive it 25 yards down the field, but if he can loft it 25 yards down the field, that's a different story.
All right, so what have you thought of Mac so far? Because yesterday he threw the early pick, and then I thought bounced back and was fine. He wasn't great, but he wasn't bad. I actually thought he was making some really nice throws today until he threw. The pick at the end was brutal. So
right,
it was a design rollout. Mac rolls out to his right. The defense had him dead to rights. They read it totally. Everybody flushes over with him. It was a total bailout. Like, there's nobody left on the backside, and Mac kind of tried to cut it back towards the middle of the field, but that's not going to open anybody up. And then I don't know if he was trying to throw it away and he threw it too low, or if he forgot that the offense doesn't wear blue or whatever, but he hit Kyle Duggar right between the numbers. I don't want to take away an interception from Kyle Duggar, but come on. But I thought before that, he had a good day. So that was the interception he threw on day 1 wasn't an amazing pass, but that was one I thought where Kyle Duggar went out and got it. That was a really good play by Kyle Duggar. So, one mental lapse so far, like what's been your read on Mac Jones? And do you think he's kind of kicking some of those bad habits he developed last year?
I think in some respects, yeah. But I think the biggest thing with me for Mac right now is I can see what he's good at the NFL level. When he's throwing the ball on time, in rhythm from the pocket, he's effective. He can put the ball where he wants to put it. He understands what the offense is trying to accomplish. He can read coverage. He can diagnose plays quickly. And this comes back to the same thing that I feel like we talk about ad nauseum with him. When he's protected in the pocket and the receivers are running functional routes, then Matt can deliver the ball with timing and accuracy. In touch. I would also throw that element in there as well. The Kyle Duggar interception that you mentioned is where it tends to snowball on him, and he tends to have issues when he's asked to play make, whether it's outside the pocket or it's after, what I would call second reaction or extended plays where the play breaks down and there's nobody open initially, and now it just becomes playground football. He doesn't have, I don't think, the physical tools to win in playground football mode. Like, I don't think that's going to be something that he's going to be super good at the NFL level. You look at guys like Mahomes, Allen, those guys can go and they can run around and they can make plays happen and create something out of nothing. Mac needs to win in structure. He needs to let the scheme and the offense do the driving for him, and he's just out there distributing the football. Now, when you hear that, you're going to say that's kind of a limited quarterback. Like, how do you win at a high level with a quarterback that can't really upgrade the offense on his own or make things happen on his own? But I think that when they have a functional offensive coordinator, hopefully some of these receivers that they brought in, Juju, maybe those guys start popping a little bit more, then you can have an offense that can operate 95% of the time in structure. Every time the pocket moves or every time the play breaks down, I hold my breath. That's when I get concerned about Mac Jones. But I think when he's in structure and he's operating from the pocket and clean pockets, I think is a big part of it too. Like, he's a really effective passer, and the numbers have bared that out even last year, even with how bad it was last year.
It goes back to something I said a lot with Mac last year. Like, everybody's like, oh, he can't handle, his coaching staff. Why should he be expected to handle his coaching staff? And look, it's a little different because he's never going to have perfect protection over the course of a season. Like, things break down, he's going to get blitzed, things happen, but you would hope that he plays the majority of his career with an offensive line better than the one he had last year. And that brings us to now. I think Trent Brown's looked good. Yep. It seems like they're plugging him back in at left tackle, and they're not going to move him around again. Right tackle's the other question. It's been primarily Riley Reiff to this point. Calvin Anderson is on NFI, so we don't know if he's going to factor in later. The other guy's Connor McDermott, who really is kind of repped much further down the depth chart. Do you think that's a matter of they see it as that big of a gap and Riley Reiff is the determined starter and there's no competition? Or is that maybe something more along the lines of Riley Reiff wasn't here last year, it's a new system, he's got to learn it, whereas Connor McDermott's maybe a little more familiar, and once they get past the teaching stage and into the competitive phase, when the pads come on, then maybe we start to see those two battle it out a little more?
I think Riley Reiff is the right tackle they want to win the job. I think he was paid like the guy that was supposed to be the starting right tackle.
$5 million guaranteed.
And he's a veteran guy that's been around for a while. I think they looked at him as like the guy with the inside track for the job, and his job to lose. If he comes out and plays poorly in camp, then that opens the door for Connor McDermott or Sidy Sow, or hey, even Andrew Stuber is out there practicing again. Yep. So maybe that opens up the door for one of those guys. Calvin Anderson comes back from NFI and he gets an opportunity. But I've been concerned about Reiff since the moment that they signed him to that contract, with the thinking that he was going to be the starting right tackle, because I really thought his film last year declined. I thought he was already in decline. With the Bears. His foot speed, I thought, was in decline, and his ability to really get out and protect his edge, I thought, was already a concern. And that's sort of what we've seen in these non-padded sessions, where it's really an athletic contest. It's not, you can't hit anybody, you can't get hands on anybody, really. You're not coming off the ball and trying to, really make any contact. So in these types of situations where you're truly just dancing out there and you're not really touching anybody, he's not going to be able to slide over with Josh Uche or even slide over with some of their secondary guys. Like I saw, Ronnie Perkins go around him at one point, and that's going to be a concern, I think, at that spot. Now, we've talked in the past about ways to work around it, ways to scheme around it, what the quarterback can do, and all those things are all well and good, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to our guys against your guys at some point, and you got to hold up in pass protection for Mac to put those drives together. So I have big concerns about right tackle. Now, I liked what I've seen out of Calvin Anderson up until this point. Obviously, he hasn't been out there. I don't think he's on the non-football illness list.
NFI.
Which is a little bit
whatever
bizarre.
That means.
I don't think that's going to be, it shouldn't be at least a long-term thing where he misses all of camp or something like that. So I think we're going to see him out there again eventually. And the one thing that you like about Calvin Anderson is certainly way younger than Riley Reif, and he's more athletic than Riley Reif is. So
I think he's about the same size too.
Yeah, he's a good athlete. He was a good athlete coming out of college. He was just raw and had really a tough go of it in college. But athletically, he tested extremely well coming out. And I think he's somebody that could add a little bit more of a fresher perspective at right tackle versus Riley Reif, who they might trust because of his experience in the league. But I don't know if he can really keep up anymore at this level.
And yeah, Calvin Anderson, 6'5", 300. Reif is 6'5", 310. So
yeah, he's a little bit more slender, like more of that athletic build at tackle versus like a Trent Brown, who's just a massive human.
All right, couple quick ones on offense because we don't have the full hour like we usually do on Catch 22. Yeah. You tweeted at the very start of practice today, Demario Douglas season. That was it. Yeah. That was the tweet.
That's
Why?
It.
Why is it Demario Douglas season?
So I think a couple of things. One, you do see him working with other first team players. And that's something that always stands out to us when we go and watch these practices. Who's playing with who, when they break off into first team, second team, who's going with which group. And it started yesterday that he started going with Kendrick Bourne and Juju Smith-Schuster, Devontae Parker, and Tyquan Thornton. That's been the four that we've all locked in onto the roster whenever we do a projection or something like that, was those four. And it's always been up to the fifth receiver spot has been the one that's up for grabs. And so far, Demario Douglas has been cemented in as the fifth receiver, just in terms of who he's playing with and who he's catching passes from. So I think that that's one thing. Two, I just look at the way that he plays. And I think that he's different from the rest of the guys that they have in that room. You talk about Parker, Bourne, Juju. Those guys are kind of, obviously Parker's his own little thing, but they're longer striders. They're bigger. They're more physical guys. Like that's how they kind of win. And obviously Tyquan is the slender speed guy. So all those guys are taller. They're a little bit more reliant on their size than somebody like Demario Douglas, whereas Douglas is this little quick jitterbug that's explosive. He's got 4.4 speed, a really, really good downfield route runner in college. We'll see in the next couple of weeks if that's able to translate when he's got guys pressing him and wearing him down the field physically. But he is a really quick, explosive separator at all three levels of the defense, and he has that gadget play element to him. So the comparison I use for him and we use for him throughout draft season was day 3 Zay Flowers or small school Zay Flowers, whatever you want to use. And I still feel like that's true. I still feel like that he's proven that that's exactly what he is. But granted, we got to wait until we see some more physicality, because he's the type of guy that could get worn down by a physical corner.
Right. Well, he did put on, about 15 pounds. So I think that helps. And the other thing I'd say, not to dismiss any of what you said, I agree with everything that you said, but there was one period today where most of the team was doing kickoff work, special teams work, and the quarterbacks went to the side field with the main group of those four receivers, Smith-Schuster, Bourne, Thornton, and Parker. And they were just kind of throwing with them and going through simple route stuff. It's not that individual window, I think, accomplished a ton, but Bourne has pulled away from that second group, from that, competing for the fifth spot. But I think he's still closer to that second group than he is to the top group.
Okay. So
right, I say Bourne, not Booty, Douglas. This is what happens when you do 3 podcasts and 2 radio shows
I
in
warned
the
you.
span of about 15 hours.
I
I
have a question. I have a question for you though.
Yeah.
Was Douglas returning punts at the time? Because that's something that he's done a little bit of so far. So maybe he wasn't with that other group because he's got special
So
teams.
that's true. And I think Marcus Jones is the punt returner. I feel pretty confident about that. He wasn't as good of a kick returner last year, and historically, he's been more of a punt returner than a kick returner, whereas Douglas, and we've compared the two as ball carriers a lot, Douglas's background is more kick returns than punt returns.
Yeah.
So, yes, but if they felt comfortable with the fact he was going to make the roster, would they have him returning kicks or would they have him be throwing with the quarterbacks?
I don't know. I just feel like if he's going to be the 5th receiver, then he's going to have to play in the kicking game to make the game day roster.
But that kind of proves my point. He's still competing for the 5th receiver spot more than he is like closer to that other. Because I've seen some people and look, this is camp and it's 2 days into camp. Things get out of hand in terms of how you talk about players. But I see people starting to kind of inch him towards roster lock status. No, that's not what's happening here. It's just there's group 1 that is all roster locks: Thornton, Bourne, Parker, Smith-Schuster. And then there's group 2, which is 1, maybe 2 of those guys will make the roster, if that. Remember, last year, we did all that talk about the 5th wide receiver spot between Trey Nixon, Christian Wilkerson, and Lil Jordan Humphrey. And yes, Lil Jordan Humphrey ended up on the team in week 2, but week 1, none of those guys were on the initial roster. So it's still trending that way. One more quick thing on offense. It was reported today by Jeremy Fowler of ESPN that Dalvin Cook is setting up a meeting with the Patriots, or trying to set up a meeting. So no meeting yet, but it's trending that way. We have I have some thoughts on those comments on that report on 98.5thesportshub.com. But Evan, where are you at with Dalvin Cook? Do you want him? Do you think they get him? Etc.
I don't think this team is in a position to turn down talent. Whether or not I think that Dalvin Cook as a running back at 27 years old is going to significantly move the needle or not, at the end of the day, they need skill talent. They need players that can move the football, and he's one of those guys. So I'm never going to turn down the talent. I'm just going to turn down the excitement of them actually going out and signing him. I think one reason why is because I feel like he's going to go to the Jets. So that's a big reason. But I think the second reason to that also is just I don't know how much it truly moves the needle for them. But at the same time, we've talked a lot about their running back depth behind Ramondre Stevenson and how Ramondre got worn down last year. And it's really unproven behind him right now. It's the second-year guys, Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris, combined 27 touches as rookies. Ty Montgomery really hasn't been a factor in the NFL offense for like 5 years. So at some point, you do look at that group and you say there's not a ton of trusted or known commodities, like guys that you can really hang your hat on that you can trust are going to be reliable. So Dalvin Cook certainly would do that. But we talked a little bit on Catch 22 about also like his opportunity here. How much is he going to play? How much? What are the stats? Like what is his opportunity to put up numbers so that he can cash in next offseason? Like those types of things are a factor as well, and why I think he's probably a better fit with the Jets.
So I wonder, and this I didn't formulate this take today because of the injury that happened. It's just it kind of all these reports today got at the same time got my mind going. But so Ty Montgomery was a standout yesterday, and I had Bob Sosi on last night. And if people missed the first episode of the Sports Hub Patriots podcast training camp, subscribe to the Patriots audio feed, Sports Hub Patriots audio feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You'll get all these daily shows, plus player interviews. And when we appear on the radio, Dolph was on last night. I'll be on tonight with Joe Murray, which by the time this is up will probably have already happened. But when the conversation me and Bob had was basically, well, Ty Montgomery looks good, but he's a very unique player. You need to build certain things into the offense for him. You don't have a backup for him. So how much can you really build around him in your offensive system? And if, again, needing to get Dalvin Cook on the field and probably needing to get him on the field with Ramondre Stevenson, how do you do that? What if you built those things in for Dalvin Cook? Because he is advanced as a pass catcher. He doesn't have the pure wide receiver background Ty Montgomery does. I don't know that he could do everything they're asking Ty Montgomery to do, but a lot of the stuff I do think, you get him in camp for a month, you get him caught up, I think he'd be able to handle. And by the time you get in November, December, I think he'd be pretty good at. What if you sign Cook for that role and then Ty Montgomery essentially becomes the backup? And then you've essentially upgraded that role. And the nice little part on top of it, it's not the whole thing, but the nice little part on top of it is you can still run these concepts in your offense without having to bank on Ty Montgomery staying healthy, which, we'll see if he's out there tomorrow. He banged knees with Terez Hall today. Continue to practice for a little bit, continue to run some routes, but ultimately you could tell the left leg was bothering him. He was shaking it. He was rubbing it, spent the rest of practice with trainers, didn't do any more team drills.
Yeah. So I think Dalvin Cook can catch the football. He was used effectively last year by Kevin O'Connell at times outside the formation, right? We're talking not in the backfield, like whether it's in the slot or in that wing formation, a type of role, or even out wide at times. But a lot of the time, what they did with him was use him in those situations at an empty. So just to kind of blur the lines of formations and things like that and personnel groupings. And also a lot of the passes that he caught were shallow drags and things in a straight line, right? He ran some wheels and he ran some crossing routes like that. He's not somebody, I think with Ty Montgomery, what gets me a little bit excited about him as a player is that I think he's got some quickness in and out of his break. I don't know if Dalvin Cook is going to bring that top of the route quickness to the table, but I definitely think that he would have that ability. He's one of those guys that you just want to get the ball in his hands, whether it's as a pass catcher or it's as a running back, because he's so explosive that he gets some open field. I mean, we saw it against Buffalo, right? He can turn 1st and 10 at the 25 into a 75-yard touchdown. There's not a lot of guys in the league that can do that. So whether it's throwing him the ball, whether it's him running it, you just want to try to create opportunities for him to touch the football. And that's what the Vikings did last year, but it was more like in a schemed oriented way versus him actually just going out there, shaking a guy at the top of the route and getting open.
So it's funny, doing 2 shows in a day, me and you, like there's a couple of points I've made on this show that I made on Catch 22 that you're just like, yeah, good point. And you drove home, thought about it, and now you're pushing back on me a little bit. So it's something I got to be aware of. On defense, I want to give you my surprise standout of the day, which again, we did a show today, so it's not a surprise, but I was like a couple times. So late in practice, they did 11 on 11 red zone 1-versus-1s. Those are generally high impact reps. And I've come around on Jelani Tavai from last year. People remember last year, I wasn't high on him at all. I think he was misused at this time last year. They were still trying to make him like a sideline to sideline coverage linebacker, which he was never going to be.
Right.
He found a home as a strong side edge setter on early downs. I thought he played well in that role, but comes out today, swim move, beats Riley Reif for a sack on Mac Jones, would be sack on Mac Jones. And then I thought he had a pretty nice coverage rep too on Pierre Strong that resulted in a pass breakup. So I don't know that he's going to become their Matt Milano, their star coverage linebacker, but I do think it is worth noting when a guy who is really known and generally works in early down situations, when he comes out, he makes a couple of plays in passing situations. I think that's worth noting because if he can contribute even a little bit on passing downs, the more you can do, right?
Yeah, he's a really, in my mind, I think he's a really solid, well-rounded player in the run game, especially that isn't going to be flashy. Like this is not a guy that's going to go out there and pad the stat sheet or put up a ton of pressures like a Matthew Judon or somebody like that. But he's an okay pass rusher and he's an okay run defender, which makes him a solid player, especially in their defense. Now in coverage, you worry about the bigger guys like him in coverage. He's 250, 255, I think. And you do have concerns about him in space. I wouldn't say it's something I would do all the time, but the one with Pierre Strong, he kind of dropped off the edge a little bit and he kind of had the leverage, right? He had the body positioning where he almost has a head start on the race by where he was positioned. Those things, I think, if that's part of the scheme of how they're going to kind of, all right, if he goes this way, this guy's got him. If he goes that way, that guy's got him. Then I think that he can be fine. You just don't want him isolated.
You don't want him in man, yeah.
Right. So that's a little bit of a difference, but he's one of those guys, and I understand that some people think that they have too many of these guys, but he's one of those guys that just is going to take care of his 111. It's not going to be sexy. It's not going to be flashy, but he's going to take care of his responsibility on every single play, and that's how they get into 3rd and 8, and that's how they unlock Judon and Uche and Barmore and the pass rush package to get after quarterbacks and cause havoc. So that's the whole thing with this Patriots defense. It always has been first and second down. They're great on third down. I know they weren't great percentage-wise last year on third down, but they're typically a pretty good third down defense, and definitely a defense that turns you over on third down a lot or creates negative plays on third down. But you got to get into third down in order for that to happen. So I think Tavai is one of those guys that allows you to be a pretty solid, well-rounded first and second down defense, which then obviously allows the playmakers to do their jobs.
And the playmaker on the defense through 2 days of camp, really, I mean, the playmaker on the defense, I don't need to qualify that, is Kyle Duggar.
Yeah.
Another interception today. I thought more so than what he did on the field. The comments were interesting. Bill Belichick was asked about the extension, and Matt Groh was asked about extensions yesterday as well. But Bill Belichick saying today, these are the kind of guys that go high in the draft. These are the kind of guys that get paid. And then you combine that with Matt Groh's comments yesterday where he said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but something along the lines of, the trickiest part about extensions is there's a whole year of unknown. You're estimating the market rather than working directly in the market. It feels like Kyle Duggar is giving them every reason to pay him and pay him now as he's eligible for this extension. It's just, is there a tipping point where it's, well, now I don't want to sign. Now I want to hit the open market because I'm going to get so much money. And do the Patriots kind of need to start getting urgent about this deal? And I don't know that anybody's ever gotten a record-setting deal off a training camp, but if it's trending towards him having that kind of season, some people have him as an all-pro player. If it's trending towards him having that kind of season, do the Patriots just need to kind of maybe overpay a little bit and say, all right, we got to get this deal done now, because if we go back and do this in the spring, it's going to be twice as expensive.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that element of it. And I also think just this is sort of a big picture thing that we've been talking a lot about on our shows, is just you got to start building a nucleus of players. And I think one of the things that frustrates me sometimes with the team, and I don't know if it necessarily is true for like a Jacoby Myers as much, because I do think they could have upgraded that spot and might have with Juju, but it's pretty hard to upgrade Kyle Duggar. Like, I don't know if you're going to find a better safety just sitting out there in the draft or free agency to be better than him. And at some point in time, you got to start to commit to some guys as like, these are our pillars. Like, these are our guys we're building around. And I think that he's one of those guys that has earned it. And I do wonder if the team, and I think they've done this in the past with guys like John Jones and Shaq Mason, went to Kyle Duggar. Maybe they already have talked a little bit about parameters of an extension. And they said, look, have a good training camp, come in shape, have a good summer, do all the right things in August. And at the end of August, if everything is going well, we're going to sit down and get down to brass tacks and try to get something done. And like I said, they've done it in the past with a couple different guys. The one that I remember covering the team was John Jones, had a terrific summer. And then we were just sitting there waiting for the regular season to start. And then boom, Jonathan Jones signs an extension. So I think that could happen again with a guy like Kyle Duggar, and would certainly be worth it to I think both of us if they did that. But it's that I feel like is something that they would do, just to be like, hey, just play well in camp, come in shape, get ready to go. And if the arrow is still pointing all the way up, like we think it's going to, then we'll get the deal done.
And that's why, yes, he has the 2 interceptions, and it's not nothing. But I think maybe the biggest thing to take away from the first few days regards to Kyle Duggar is you've had some of the other players in the secondary talking about he's starting to take on some of those communication responsibilities that Devin McCourty had. And that's, you talk about building a core, building a nucleus. Well, if you're going to commit to a guy and make him part of a core of your team, you want him to have some of those leadership roles. Yeah. And so the fact that Kyle Duggar is starting to step into that when we talk about a contract extension in his future, that probably holds more weight than, Mac Jones missed a throw and hit you between the numbers.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Yeah, no, not, and just one, you look at the nucleus thing, I think it's important, because if I told you right now, if you had to go buy a Patriots jersey, I like this exercise. Like, you have to go buy a Patriots jersey. Whose jersey are you buying?
Yeah, it's tough. You're getting one of the throwback ones at this point. I know like Gonzalez is some, and it's, I know where you're going, and I just want to jump in. We thought we saw it because Jacoby Myers seemed like a foundational core player. Damian Harris, even though there was the thing about them paying running backs, which is the way he approached the day-to-day of it, felt like a potential core player. and then there were guys like Dante Hightower and Devin McCourty who had left. So they lost, both young and old, a lot of potential core players in the last year or 2 years. And what is it? They only have like 30-something players under contract next year.
Right.
And how many of those are rookies and UDFAs who are still on their deals?
I think right. And that, what I look at is, just for example, to spin it forward, Marty Mapu is a guy that, from a body type standpoint and from some of the things that we've seen in the beginning of camp, they look like they're trying to use him as like that hybrid safety. And when he was drafted, I think a lot of people said, well, there's your Kyle Duggar replacement. But why are we trying to replace Kyle Duggar? Like, right. You have to start paying some people because you have nobody under contract and you have all this cap space next year. You have over $100 million in cap space. So somebody's going to get paid. And you finally drafted a guy and hit on an early round draft pick. That was the first pick in the 2020 draft for the Patriots, and it was a good pick. It's a good player. So at some point, this is where I get like bothered, because like, why are we continuously just draft, replace instead of building something? Like, that's not building anything. That's just resetting the roster every 3 to 4 years.
And you do that when you already have a core in place, and you do that around them. Right. You don't want to be doing that with your core players. All right. Yeah. Before we wrap it up here, Evan, what are you looking for tomorrow? We'll just call it the next few days leading up to the first all padded practice.
Yeah, I think the last thing for me is I just want to see, and I think maybe we're a little bit too early in camp for this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I just want to see Mac like own a day. Like, can we have one day where we can come away from practice and be like, Mac lit it up? Like and maybe that's not just all on Mac. I don't think it is, right? The receivers got to get open. They got to catch the ball, all that kind of stuff. But I'm still waiting to see that sequence, that moment, that practice where we're like, wow, that was just, he lit it up. And I go back because people are going to say, well, he can't do it. He's not capable. Remember the joint practices with the Giants in his rookie season? The
Giants practice, as it's now known. One of the most historic days in the history of the New England Patriots.
when he won the job officially.
He was like 36 of 45 or something like that. It was insane.
He tore it up. And so he is capable of it. We have seen it before in a camp setting that he's done that. And at some point in this training camp over the next couple of weeks, he's going to have to at least do it once, if not multiple times, for me to feel really good.
He is Evan Lazar of Patriots.com. You can read his work there, and be sure to check out the Catch 22 podcast on Patriots.com. New episode up every Thursday, including today. If you like this, you'll like that. And We'll be back tomorrow as well with another edition of the Sports Hub Patriots podcast, Training Camp edition. So until then, Evan, thanks for coming on.
Of course.
And I'm Alex Barth, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.